All right, everybody, let's get started. Welcome to State Attorneys General, Democracy Defenders. Thank you. My name is Jonathan Sklarczyk. I'm the COO and General Counsel of the Progressive State Leaders Committee. I'm here moderating today's discussion, and we're going to go right into it. And before I introduce our panelists, let me just set the scene a little bit. Conservative and far-right forces are engaging in a comprehensive campaign to restrict voter registration, access to voting and polling places, and challenging certifications of elections and outcomes. It's a campaign of directed chaos, and it's meant to interfere with the administration of elections and sow doubt into the legitimacy of electoral outcomes. But this is not a panel of doom and gloom. I'm here to tell you that we actually have democracy defenders at work pushing back, and that's what we're here to talk about today, about our state attorneys general. We're going to hear from them and talk about what state attorneys general do and their important and critical role in defending our democracy and our elections, which couldn't be more apparent than in this election year in 2024. And it's going to continue in 26 and 28 and all the elections that follow. State attorneys general are often the chief legal officers and chief law enforcement officers in their respective states. They represent the state in court. That means they represent the governor, the secretary of state, the state election boards. They are the ones who are in court, who are filing litigation, who are taking on the challenges. Some of them even have criminal authority and exercise it in defense of our elections when necessary. They provide guidance on state law and are important voices in election integrity. They truly are the defenders of our democracy. So today's panel, we're going to look at the role of the attorneys general and hear directly from them. I want to start with, on the screen, with Attorney General Michelle Henry of Pennsylvania. I'm not going to go through their full bios. Their bios are on the app, and I do encourage you to take a look and learn a little bit about their background. AG Henry is a lifelong public servant and 26-year veteran prosecutor. She was the first Deputy Attorney General under Attorney General and now Governor Josh Shapiro. To my right is Attorney General Keith Ellison of Minnesota. Attorney General Ellison has served as Attorney General since 2019, and many of you may know he was the lead prosecutor in the matter of the May 2020 death of George Floyd, and he led the team that successfully convicted Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. And prior to serving as Attorney General, he served in Congress for 12 years. And then to my far right is Sarah Tindall Gazelle. Sarah is our, absolutely gets a round of applause. Sarah is the Democracy Protection Fellow for the Progressive State Leaders Committee and is our expert in election protection. She has deep expertise, having established the first voter protection program for the Democratic Party in the state of Georgia in the 2018 election cycle. And she serves as a member of Georgia's state election board. So she is deep in this right here and right now. And so thank you, Sarah, for coming and being part of this.
Thank you, Sarah.
So I'm going to start by asking the panelists a couple questions, and then we'll have some questions to the broad panel, and we'll see if we have some time for some audience questions to the whole panel after that. But let me start with you, AG Henry. You are a former first deputy AG. You're now the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, which, as we all know, is a critical swing state. And you've really gone from the frying pan to the fire in this role. At the same time, you're in this enviable position of being able to focus on the policy of democracy rather than the politics, as you're not facing election this year. So can you share your approach to these issues from that perspective?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me begin by just saying thank you for hosting this. I think what we're talking about here today is so important. It's certainly a priority of mine in my office. And so, Jonathan, it's great to be here. And it's also great to be here with my good friend and colleague, General Ellison. So thank you for having me. And I'll just say, look, we have a duty at the Attorney General's office to defend the election process, to ensure that we have free, fair, and equal elections. And we take that very seriously. And when I think about that, I don't treat that, although it's a very important priority to me, any different than anything else that's done in this office. And that is, we look at the cases that come in, we look at the reports that come in, we look at the investigation, and we take our time and we make sure that we look at the facts and we follow the law. And that's really our guiding post, right? And so we look at the facts, we look at the law, and I always say to the team, we call balls and strikes. And so, regardless of where the complaint's coming from, who's alleging it, what lawsuit's being filed, when we look at those cases, it's our job and our duty to apply the law and the facts and act accordingly. And so we have, we have come up against.
Don't you love technology?
It's so bad, but we defend our election process. Pennsylvania, whether it's by revenue, as you said, Jonathan, or our Secretary of State or the governor through multiple lawsuits, or whether it's combating misinformation that's out there or threats of violence. Regardless of how it comes in, that is what we spend our time doing, and that requires tremendous preparation and really an approach in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office is all hands on deck with all of our divisions. So we take it very seriously. It's a high priority for us, and I think it's critical that we be ready for this upcoming election.
That's right.
Thank you, A.G. Henry. A.G. Ellison, continuing in the same vein, can you provide some examples of steps that your office is taking to defend democracy against threats, including from other branches of government?
Well, let me tell you, just this year we had a very productive and fruitful legislative session, which culminated in a 20-year fight. 20 years ago when I was a state legislator, I introduced a bill that said that if you're out, you can vote. If you're on probation or parole, you can vote. It didn't get passed, even though we fought every single year until the year 2023. And so now, if in Minnesota, if you're out, you can vote. If you're not, you can be on probation or parole and you can vote. No sooner than the ink was dry on the bill, folks sued to make it unconstitutional. Now, it's not my job to make the law, but it's my job to defend the law. So we jump right into the fight and we vigorously defend that law. But we don't just go to court and make it a legal affair. We actually engage community around what we were doing because we know that the real power is from the grassroots. And if people know and they feel what we're doing, they will support it and they will rally around our defense of this lawsuit, and it will be overall beneficial for democracy. We got people who have been involved with the criminal justice system to care and focus their attention on what we were doing, and we expect a favorable decision any day from the Minnesota Supreme Court. But there was a judge who, all on his own, and I'll tell you his name. His name is Matthew M. Quinn, from the 7th Judicial District of Minnesota, who was taking everybody on probation, everybody who came in front of him and said, I think this law is unconstitutional and you cannot vote if you're on probation to me. So we joined with the public defender to invalidate that illegal sentence, and the Court of Appeals ruled that in our favor that he could not do that. And then I filed a judicial complaint against him for violating his judicial oath to uphold the law, and the Board of Judicial Ethics just found him in violation. So the bottom line is, I agree with Michelle 100%. If you win the election, fine, you won. I don't care what party. In Minnesota, we've had Jesse Ventura, who was an Independence Party, Democrat, Republican, whatever. Whoever wins, that's who wins. But the people get to vote, and judges need to follow the law. And so that's what we're going to. That's what we're working on. Another example of us fighting to uphold people's right to vote is in the last presidential election. We had a group from Tennessee, Aegis Atlas. Their name doesn't matter, but this group was recruiting armed guards to go up and protect the polling places in Minnesota. Well, we didn't need their, and didn't ask for their armed protection of our polling places. And so we let them know that if they do that, that we will regard that as voter intimidation. And before we were able to even start suing them, we told them we were about to sue them. They came to the table. We negotiated an injunction where they would not do that. And we told them we're not going to put up with anybody intimidating voters in Minnesota. So we view our role as the Attorney General's office is vitally important to protect and defend people's right to make a choice, right? And so that's the role that we play. We defend the Secretary of State's office, which is the chief elections official in our state. We happen to have a wonderful Secretary of State, a fellow by the name of Steve Simon. It's worth clapping when you hear his name. He's a great man. And so we defend him. But then sometimes we find that Minnesota law might not be right. We had a law that said that if you want to vouch for someone to register to vote, that nobody could vouch for more than 3 people. And yet the Voting Rights Act says you can get whoever you want to help, help you vote, right? And so we found, after examining Minnesota law and the Voting Rights Act, that Minnesota law was probably preempted by federal law. So we went into court and said, well, nope, federal law has to prevail here. So sometimes protecting the right to vote is recognizing that Minnesota law might not square properly with federal law, but that we also view that as part of our responsibility to recognize that when any law is unconstitutional or preempted, that we've got to abide by what the prevailing law is. But in any case, we view this as critical to the work that we do every day. And I'll just add one more thing, if you don't mind. We even view our antitrust law as advancing democracy. Because let me tell you, if you have 2 or 3 companies that dominate an industry, say the oil industry, meat packing, you name it, beer, hotels, search engines, whatever you want. And what do they do with these monopoly profits that they have? Well, after they've bought enough boats and enough mansions and whatever, they sometimes want to rent a congressman. And so under Citizens United, they can, right? So we view our work to make more competitive markets and deconcentrate markets as critical work when it comes to allowing the democratic prerogative to prevail. And so I hope that you all start thinking about anti-monopoly work as also democracy work, because let me tell you, with all that extra money that they pile up with those monopoly profits, they're not just buying luxury items with it. They might be trying to make a down payment on democracy too. So those are just a few things that we do to defend democracy from my office's vantage point.
That's a really important point, which is that we're not just talking about the voting statutes. It's antitrust, it's consumer protection. There are so many areas that not only touch upon democracy, but are also squarely within the purview of our state attorneys general as advocates and as enforcement agents. And so I think I really appreciate that point. And I'll just a note to all the panelists, even though I'm asking some of these initial questions to individual panelists, if anyone else would like to jump in on any of the questions, please feel free. So Sarah, you have a sort of different perspective on this as being the client of the Attorney General in many cases. You're a member of Georgia's election board. You work with the Attorney General in that attorney-client relationship. Can you talk about what that looks like, what it means to be the state agency, the election board member, and to have an Attorney General who is representing you?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So I can just recount this past week up to like an hour ago to give you some really good examples of the relationship between an agency that deals directly with election law and the Attorney General's office. I'm sure many of you, when you're drawing up your plans and you're doing communications and you've got press releases and mailers, run it by the attorneys. You make sure you run it through compliance. Well, that is the role that the Attorney General plays as well for state agencies. We are undertaking in Georgia some rulemaking right now. And for that, we have to make sure that the Attorney General's office has signed off that the rules that are being proposed are not going to violate state or federal law, or in fact, even the Constitution, because in some cases, some of them very well may. And at this juncture, this is such a critically important role because it's not just the state boards that are trying to pass rules, but we have petitions coming from outside groups that are pushing for rules that some of them would absolutely exacerbate the chaos that is being promulgated right now. For instance, we had a rule that was proposed, it came directly from a political party that would have allowed up to 50 poll watchers from any political party inside a tabulation center. That's what they're asking for. And that is why we've got attorney general offices who get to say, sorry, that violates the black letter law. But I literally sit right next to my representative in the Attorney General's office in the middle of a board meeting, so I can lean over and ask questions, thinking, I don't think this will go, this won't fly, will it? So that's such an important role. And then exchanging emails with him, literally sitting outside about our meeting process, open meeting rules, open meetings and document rules, sunshine laws, the state FOIA laws are also really critically important for democracy because democracy dies in darkness, as they say. Sunshine is so important to make sure that everything is open and public in that process. Because we're here in Maryland, I don't have as many really happy stories about what's happening in Georgia. And how we're working hard to protect democracy. But in our host state, in my role with the PSLC, working with attorney general's offices across the country, I've seen incredible work being done. Attorney General Brown's office, in fact, has worked with their state board of elections to pass some really important regulations about safety for voters around ballot boxes, about ballot drop boxes. So they now have rules on the books that prohibit anybody to have weapons within 50 feet or anybody to stay there and observe and film voters. So it prohibits voter intimidation. It also restricts the way that voter lists, they've developed new rules to restrict the way that voter lists can be used. To do this sort of door-to-door voter intimidation that we see moving on the right, where you have activists showing up at people's doors saying, did you vote? Is this you? Are you registered here? And attempting to impeach former votes. And that is now prohibited in Maryland due to the good work of the Attorney General's office here, Attorney General Brown, who unfortunately really wanted to be here with us, but could not join us today. So. Yeah, it's an incredibly important relationship that we have.
That's great.
Thank you. A.J. Ellison, one of the most important roles, actually, let me ask this. So one of the most important roles of the Attorney General is consumer protection.
Right.
And one of the rising threats to consumers is the advent of deepfakes that use AI technology to turbocharge disinformation. What do you see as the role of your office protecting the public? What would you recommend that our audience members do to guard against this threat?
Well, how many people here today have become aware of how tricky and how convincing a deep fake can be? That's good. If you don't know, ask the person who raised their hand. Some of them are very, very good, and we are very concerned about it, as is our Secretary of State. These deep fakes, they can mimic your voice. They can mimic, a politician's voice. They can tell you from an authoritative-looking source that Democrats vote on Wednesday, Republicans vote on Tuesday. I mean, they can get real clever with it. And so what we're doing is we're educating our team. We believe that right now, we don't need new laws to hold people accountable and to bring lawsuits for people who do these deep fakes. The question is catching them, because we already have what they call UDAP laws, unfair and deceptive trade practices we can use. But we believe we do need to update those laws, and we do need to get more specific, but we don't believe we're without tools at this very moment. So we have a team, a task force at my office where we work on voting rights issues every single day. We had a day-long CLE on AI and deepfakes, and we had a whole section on election protection. And I can tell you that in the group that Michelle and I belong to, a group that a lot of us in our organization, Democratic Attorney Generals Association, think a lot about protecting voters' rights from deepfakes and misuse of artificial intelligence. So there you go.
Thank you. A.G. Henry, in Pennsylvania's election process and results were attacked in 2020 in the court of law and the court of public opinion. Can you tell us how you and your office defended against these attacks in 2020 and how those efforts have informed your preparations for this year?
Well, thank you. Yes, 2020, what a time. We had numerous challenges in Pennsylvania. From September of 2020 till December of 2020, we had 11 attacks, 11 different cases go to the United States Supreme Court on our election laws. Additionally, I think total we had 43 challenges in court. And I'm proud to say that our team really stepped up to the plate, and it was 43 challenges to individuals' right to vote and cases that were challenging that, and we were successful 43-0. So it really was an unprecedented time for a lot of different reasons. First of all, I will say that one of the things that we found was that sort of the regular order of how we do business in the court system was pretty much abandoned. So election challenges in Pennsylvania were filed directly with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court under their King's Bench jurisdiction, which is really a limited, very limited typical ability to skip the lower appellate court, so our Commonwealth Court and our Superior Court, and go directly to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But in fact, on these election challenges cases, we found that they went directly to the PA Supreme Court. In addition to that, we had a case where Texas filed a lawsuit against Pennsylvania in the United States Supreme Court's original jurisdiction. And so we had an unusual filings in different courts. And in addition to that, these state and federal lawsuits were done under an incredibly different timeline. This is Pennsylvania. We had only 3 days to respond to Texas' complaint. In addition to that, there was a case where we had 24 hours to respond in the United States Supreme Court to an emergency application. So, these were difficult times because we were grappling with COVID and we had so many different challenges. And I'm just going to highlight some of the cases that came in that the Attorney General's office was handling the litigation. Challenge were our mail-in ballots being not placed in a secrecy envelope, whether those votes could be counted, the use of drop boxes, the Secretary of State's request for a 3-day extension on mail-in ballots since it was COVID, whether residency requirements for poll watchers was constitutional, where poll watchers were permitted to sit. In all of these cases, we were involved in those cases and really had to be prepared to take them on. And what we learned from that is exactly what you just heard from the panel, which is it's so critical that we work together, that we are in lockstep talking with the Secretary of State and are prepared to jump on. And so we have been preparing for that this upcoming election in that way by working with the task force with different partners. So typically in the PA Attorney General's office, these cases where we're defending people are handled by the civil division. So when the Secretary of State gets sued or the governor gets sued, our civil division. We also have criminal jurisdiction. And so we have concurrent criminal jurisdiction. And we found that it was equally important to have our team of prosecutors and agents who were prepared, who were thinking about the issues that were coming up, who were educating the local DA's offices on different issues, and that when allegations come in, and I think this is so important and critical to stress, because oftentimes we would get calls or complaints or allegations of somebody doing something that was not permitted. And we thought it was so important to do our best to quickly investigate those matters and dispel information about it, because individuals were using that process to weaponize sometimes. And so the sooner we could do an investigation and say, no, that isn't happening, or there's not any issues here, was equally important as the other cases. So we are gearing up, and we've obviously learned from our time in 2020. I do think preparation is so critical, and we are collaborating with our state, local, and federal partners. We are in close communication with the Secretary of State, with the governor's office. I can tell you that we expected in Pennsylvania to continue to be fraught with litigation. We've already had 17 election challenges in 2024. So, I think it certainly is something that we're ready for, but it's important that we prepare for.
Thank you. Thank you, A.G. Henry. A.G. Ellison, for more than 3 decades, the Republican National Committee was prohibited by a consent decree from engaging in election security tactics that amounted to voter intimidation. And you touched upon this a few moments ago. Courts declined to renew that consent decree in 2018, and Minnesota immediately faced similar activity. Can you tell us more about that and really how this informs your approach for this year?
Well, let me tell you, let me start with the simple idea that everybody at Netroots, I think, will appreciate. The people on the other side of the political divide, most people don't agree with their views. Can I ask y'all a few questions by show of hands? True or false? Most people think that a woman should have the right to control her own body. True? Most people think that if you have a handgun, you ought to at least have a background check. Most people think that climate change is a real thing and we should do something or be responsible stewards of our environment. Okay, so there's a bunch of folks who don't agree with that. They're in the minority, the distinct minority, and they want to control society. They want to build power to rule over the majority, and they know that in a democratic society, it's harder to do. And so what do? They want to control our courts, which are counter-majoritarian institutions, and they want to suppress your votes. I can tell you, there was a guy named Weyrich. I think his name is Weyrich. Yeah, Paul Weyrich. And he said years ago, some of you, he was talking to a group of conservative folks, and he said to them, some of y'all want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. In fact, our electoral chances go up as the size of the electorate goes down. And you've heard a lot of Republicans say over the years that they want to suppress the vote. That's what a lot of this stuff is all about. They know that if people show up and vote their preferences, a lot of things that we don't have in our society, we will have. Why can't we have nice things? Because these people are opposed to it. And so the reality for us is that we have to get ready to protect voter access. We have to make sure that people have access to the ballot box. We have to fight off bogus, fake electors, as many of Michelle and I's colleagues have to do. We know now that in Michigan and Nevada and Arizona and many other places, our colleagues have to go to court to make sure that elections are not ripped off and democracy is not thwarted. And it's really kind of gloves off right now. And so let me tell you, you're at the absolute right place to be this summer before this November election. You are spending your time wisely right now if you value living in a multicultural democratic society. And there's very few things you can do more important than what you're doing right this very moment. So I want to commend all of you for being here, because I know you're going to leave here fueled with a passion for protecting our democracy, because attorney generals cannot possibly do it alone. Neither can secretaries of state, neither can the U.S. Department of Justice. Our election, our democracy is going to have to be defended at the grassroots level. And so I'm so glad that you asked me this question, because what I really want to do is make a call to action from the people in this room and your neighbors and your friends where you're from. Let me just tell you, you will probably hear about somebody's voting rights being taken away before I will. Why? Because it's going to happen in front of you. It's going to happen at the polling place you're working at. It's going to happen in your neighborhood. It's going to happen on your block. It's going to happen in your tribal community. And so what we need you to know us, so that when you see this stuff, you know, oh, I'm calling the AG about this, because that's how we're going to be able to defend democracy, by working together. And just remember, Martin Luther King never held elective office. Rosa Parks never held elective office. The most important people aren't some politicians. They are the grassroots activists who have a burning passion for true democracy and inclusion of all people. So that's my answer to your question.
Sarah, I've got 2 questions for you. And you already talked a little bit about what's happening in Maryland. And again, Attorney General Anthony Brown, our host Attorney General here in Maryland, was unable to be at the panel today, and sends his apologies, and we do miss him. But this is a great opportunity to highlight what Maryland's done. And you've touched upon it a little bit, but I wonder if you could go in a little more, if there's any more detail, just about what's happened here in Maryland, in terms of strengthening access to the ballot, and in particular the role of the AG's office in enforcing voting rights. And then I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be able to do that. Again, being from Georgia, I love being able to tell good news stories, so I have to do it from our neighbors and friends. And Maryland has made some really incredible steps in the last couple of years, really since 2021, in expanding access to the ballot. And they've really focused on vulnerable populations. They have passed 3 really critical laws in the last few years. That one of them focused on expanding access to the ballot for college students and military and overseas voters, making it much, much easier, allowing for electronic submission for overseas and military voters. If you're a real voting geek, these are called UOCAVA voters, if you want to get down way into the weeds there. But also making sure that college students have access, working with institutions of higher learning, of providing opportunities for registration on campus when they're registering for classes, because college students very often have a really hard time accessing these resources. But the other 2 laws were about returning citizens and persons who are incarcerated but still eligible to vote. So it is now mandatory that the Department of Corrections and Public Safety in Maryland offer affirmatively information and opportunities to register as soon as a returning citizen is no longer incarcerated. They are given registration forms when they step out the door. And even more really landmark is the fact that now within correctional institutions, there are absentee ballot drop boxes and ballots for those individuals who are still eligible to cast a ballot, either because they're pretrial or they're incarcerated for a misdemeanor offense. They have not lost their right to vote, and Maryland has taken steps to make sure that they can exercise that right. And the AG's office works hand in hand with all of because they represent these departments to make sure that these laws are being implemented appropriately. Also in Maryland, because of 2020, because the form of voting really started to change among the voting population, many more people are starting to vote absentee ballot, but the laws are a little bit antiquated. So the laws are designed for an in-person voting system, but that's not the behavior anymore. So the AG's office filed a petition with Maryland courts to suspend some of their laws that in order to allow the State Board of Elections to start processing absentee ballots prior to Election Day. Because we all know that the longer it takes for those results to come in, the more disinformation gets to spread. So it was a really landmark petition, and it was successful. And that was entirely the work of the Attorney General's office to allow this. And they too, even though Maryland is not considered a swing state, they're still fighting litigation. They recently had a suit that would have suspended all election activity. And this was filed right before their primary started. The Attorney General's office successfully defeated the litigation, and they did it in a way that did not allow the petitioners to amplify the disinformation that was in that. They got it dismissed on standing, and that was a very deliberate effort to make sure that the narrative was about the law and not about the disinformation. And this is how Attorney General's offices are working across the country, facing so many suits. I think Nevada may have actually exceeded Pennsylvania and the number of suits that they're fighting. But I mean, I could go on all day about how many of our Attorney General offices are on the front lines every single day, day in, day out.
And I actually have a follow-up just on that. So great segue right into this next question. So turning to some of your work with the Progressive State Leaders Committee, you're working with a number of attorneys general offices across the country. We've talked about what the threat looked like in 2020, which we're pretty familiar with. We've talked about what we see happening maybe in 2024. But what's happening right now already? You touched upon this a minute ago with what happened in Georgia, but there's already been elections. There were primaries in presidential primaries across the country. So what have we seen pop up already? Can you just give us a quick taste?
Yeah, this is get ready for this, because what we're seeing in counties, right? So the smaller jurisdictions across the country, counties are that are more extreme, and their election officials are driven by activists, are starting to refuse to certify elections. We've seen it in Georgia, we've seen it in Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Michigan. So what that means is when a county refuses to certify, some state laws don't permit them to certify an election. And that literally throws the whole thing into chaos. A court can't exercise jurisdiction over an election contest until that election has been certified. So when you have a small group of political appointees who say, I refuse to certify because I just feel like something's wrong, that's not a lawful basis. So we're seeing our attorneys general having to go to court. We've seen in some cases, these local officials are being sued. Sometimes they're facing criminal charges because they are violating their oath of office. They are violating the Federal Voting Rights Act by refusing to count valid votes. But timelines are really tight. So in some cases, we're seeing attorneys general go in and filing what's called a writ of mandamus, which forces a body to do something that they have a legal obligation to do. And unfortunately, I suspect that A.G. Henry's going to be facing some of these issues very soon if she hasn't already.
Thank you, Sarah. So I have a question for all three of you on the panel. We've talked a lot about a number of issues that we're seeing: misinformation, disinformation, certification issues, interference with access to the ballot. What's your biggest concern going into 2024? And then, of course, this is not a doom and gloom panel. What's your biggest hope? What are you most hopeful for about this election year? A.G. Henry, I wonder if I could start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Sarah. I'll piggyback right off of what I was going to say about one of my concerns is this certification process and the tight deadline. I think under the law, we have till December 11th to, resolve all the court challenges and conduct any recounts and get that done. So that timeline is incredibly tight, and it's one that we, have to be so mindful of and be prepared for. The other piece of it really is we want people to feel confident about voting. We want them, when they do their mail-in vote, to feel like, number one, their vote's going to count, and two, they can have confidence in the system that it's not going to be fraught with fraud and other things. And, in 2019 in Pennsylvania, we passed our universal mail-in voting. And at that time, it was bipartisan support. And now it's really turned into a partisan issue. And so a big concern that we have is we want to have our voters, as I said, feel confident. Those individuals that are out there trying to sow confusion and corrode the public's trust is really concerning. And, the federal courts are bound by a principle, the Purcell principle, which really says that when you're getting close up to an election, federal courts cannot alter or should not alter state election laws. And there's a reason for that. It's so that we all, these things require time and effort, and we all understand how this is supposed to work. We can't have confusion. We can't have courts making rulings. So we want to be sure, number one, that going into the election and as we fight these fights, that we're making sure that everybody understands that we're on the forefront and that we're going to handle these issues and that they can have confidence in the system. The second piece, of course, is the timelines. We have to be prepared to meet those timelines and really be mindful of them. What am I hopeful? I guess I'm hopeful that we learned a lot from 2020, and I can tell you from spending time and having a lot of discussions with my colleagues, with Keith and others who have been on the front lines defending democracy, is that we're ready. We're ready. And so, based on what went down in 2020 and how we performed, the Attorney General's office and our colleagues, to defend our right to vote and democracy, we did fantastic. And I have every belief that we'll do it. And finally, I have confidence because I'll echo what Keith said, that all of you are here. I wish I could be with you in person, but all of you are here really thinking about these issues. And as Keith said, we can't do it alone. We need people to be vigilant. When you see something, reach out and know that we're here and report it and help people understand that there's a place and a resource that they can go to. So I think the audience keeps me hopeful. The work that's happening at AG's offices across the country keeps me hopeful, and we'll be ready and we'll be prepared.
Thank you. AG Ellison, your biggest concern, your biggest hope for 24?
My biggest hope and my biggest fear are almost the same. They're mere images of the other, and that is that all of the shenanigans and bad behavior and trickeration and technology and all of that stuff are going to discourage us, and that we will suffer demoralization, and people will be like, it's just all such a big mess. I'm not just going to participate. That is my biggest fear. But I also believe that this conference in our country is full of people who will just, you don't need a law degree. They're just going to get out there. They're going to knock on their doors. They're going to knock their apartment. They're going to knock the senior center they live in. They're going to have meetings with their neighbors. They're going to have meetings with people who are from diverse communities, and they're going to help encourage Americans to participate in democracy. Yes, through voting, but also through, protesting, writing a letter to the editor, showing up at a community meeting. Because at the end of the day, this is legal stuff, and as Michelle said, we're ready to fight that battle. But if the American people allow, the people who want to sow chaos and confusion to discourage them, that is my biggest worry. And on the other hand, it's also my biggest hope, because I just know that, people who show up at this conference are dedicated, committed, and very tough, and are not going to allow that sort of confusion and distraction and demoralization take root, because we're not enamored with the personality of some candidate. Our focus is on what these candidates are going to do for us. Are they going to protect our right to vote? Are they going to protect our rights? Are they going to make sure the economy is fair? Are they going to help protect the environment? That's the focus, and I believe you're motivated by what really matters, and so I have every confidence that you will be out there making sure that people protect and defend and participate fully in our democratic society.
Thank you, A.J. Ellis and Sarah. Biggest concern, biggest hope.
Thank you. So part of my concern is around the certification issue. Not because I'm worried about the law. The law is on our side in every single legal question. We know that we have the right of it. But what I'm worried about is that it's not about the law. It's not about winning a lawsuit. It's about creating chaos. It's about pursuing a narrative that our institutions are not trustworthy and having that chaos consume the real world. You know, having 50 poll watchers show up at a tabulation center, having people show up and screaming at meetings, and underestimating the power of chaos and the power of crowds that have been lied to consistently for the past 4 years. I can't believe, you would not believe the number of election experts who had never done anything more than cast a ballot until November 2020. But I will say that for somebody who has been involved in elections since the previous century, in the previous millennium, observing elections all over the world, I am the ultimate election geek. Seeing people actually engage in this process now is what gives me hope. Seeing people understand the importance of our institutions and how it is our institutions that protect our rights, and seeing the narratives break through finally about what it is that the folks who don't want elections to work want to impose on the rest of us. And seeing how people are, I almost never go on social media anymore, but scrolling through Facebook and seeing Project 2025 in 10 different posts from people who are completely unrelated to each other, realizing it's breaking through. People, everyday common people, are understanding what it is that's at stake. And they're getting involved, and they're volunteering, and they're going to be poll workers, and they're going to be poll watchers, and they're talking to their neighbors and their friends and their cousins and their community about this, and that's what gives me hope.
Thank you. So I noted,
I'm with it.
I noted at the top of the panel that this isn't just about 2024. This is going to be, and has been, and it will continue to be a critical issue and critical focus. So my question to the two AGs from your respective offices, and Sarah, in your role as a member of the Board of Elections, what's your plan post-November? What's your long-term plan for prioritizing defending democracy in elections? And A.J. Ellison, can I start with you?
Yeah. My long-term plan, starting in my own state. So let me just tell y'all, Minnesota pretty consistently has the highest turnout in the United States. Did y'all know that? And in the presidential, we get about 80%. And I am mad as hell that we didn't get that other 20%. So, you know, my long-term plan is to make sure that Americans keep faith with democracy, and that this idea of confusion, like Sarah was saying, they tried to sow chaos to demoralize you and turn your back on your society. They don't need you to go support Donald Trump. They don't need you to do that. They just need you to quit and step out and check out. So we need to make, so my plan is to keep on pushing greater voter turnout, keep on making sure people are involved, making sure that some of those folks who have been poll workers, running the election behind the desks and signing people up, that some of them have been doing it for 50 years. God bless them. And I think that all y'all under 30 need to help them out, you know?
Yeah.
Get involved, be a part of it, sign up. And just because I'm telling you, you know, our democracy might not be perfect, but you'll miss it when it's gone. And this is for sure true. And so that's what I plan on doing. From the AG's role, you know, I plan on making sure that we have our election protection team well staffed, that we're working with our colleagues across the country, like Sarah, like Michelle, like all of our other colleagues, so that we're working together, that we're not just working as AGs and lawyers, but we're working with our secretaries of state to make sure that they feel supported, up-to-date information. I plan on making sure we got a lot of information out there. People may not know voter intimidation when they see it. So we're going to continue to push out their information that people understand. If somebody shows up at a gun at your polling site, that's a problem. And we need you to report that. And so these are the kind of things that we're going to continue to do. And we're, like I said, and I started out this way, we're going to continue to make sure that, that the influence of special interests and big money in our elections stays as far away as we can keep it. Let me tell you, they're not satisfied with just dominating the economy. They want to dominate your democracy too. And we need some people who get that and understand the connection between strong antitrust policy and a well-functioning democratic society. So these are the things that we're going to be doing long-term, and I'd love to know what some folks out there are going to be doing long-term after we're done. Yeah.
Thank you. H.E. Henry, I'd love to hear from you about where Pennsylvania is going post-November.
Well, I agree with Keith. You know, I think it's so important to continue to be engaged, and really, like any issue, but especially this issue, I think education awareness is so important to continue to talk about it. And one way to do that I've found, and we certainly did it after 2020, I would expect we will continue to do it, is when people are raising these issues, when they're making these false claims, when they're filing these lawsuits that are meritless, when we're doing all these things, and we're going into court, we're defending them, we're having hearings, and then we have the court come down and rule on our side and say that it was meritless, that there was no fraud, that these claims are not justified at all, and there's nothing in the record to support them talking about that. Because we can use that to show that these things that people are hearing and these concerns that they have, they've gone to a court of law, there's been a hearing, and a judge has found that not to be the case. So I think that's really critical that we continue to talk about that, we continue to be engaged, we continue to motivate. I mean, I'm ready to hire a Sarah. I mean, she could get anybody to do anything. She's you know, the way to motivate people is really to talk about the positives and how we can do things. So we're going to continue to do that. I know I'm going to continue to do that. Obviously, I'm not going to be the AG after January, but I hope that whoever I pass this baton to, I know for sure that we have a fabulous team in the Attorney General's office. We have a blueprint that has been established on how to handle these matters, how to be the defenders of democracies, how to collaborate and work with others and get out into the community and talk about the issues. And so I'm confident that that will continue in the coming years.
And Sarah, your role as a board member for a statewide election board, what do you see as the post-November plan?
Well, I'm hopeful that it will be slightly less chaotic than my last 3 years on the board have been. But I do think I agree 100% with both of the attorneys general that public education is such an important part of what we do. I try to always use any opportunity I have to explain what processes are supposed to be, the importance of what it is. But really fundamentally, again, how important civic education is, what it means to vote. I get shouted at that we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. I want to hand them Plato's Republic whenever they say that. It's like, you really need to go back to school. But it's true. I mean, folks need to understand really the fundamental basics of what it is to be accountable and why we have elections and how to hold our public officials accountable through that. And it's the first step. I mean, an election does not a democracy make, but it is necessary but not sufficient. So making sure that folks remain engaged, they remain part of the process. Because when you're part of the process and you understand it, then you accept it when it doesn't always go your way.
Thank you. You've all touched upon this topic of my next question, which is about, I was going to ask about how the audience can engage in this process. You've all touched upon it, but I still want to ask it because I want to underscore how important this is. And so let me maybe ask it this way. What is the role that organizers, members of our audience, members of the public, what role can they play in supporting the work of the state attorney general in protecting free and fair elections? And even, A.G. Ellison, you said, you need to tell us when you see things, you're more likely to see it. Can you all talk a little bit about what that actually looks like? How should they engage with your offices? In what ways do you see that happening this election? And maybe A.G. Ellison, I could start with you.
Call us to community meetings that you're having. When you have a community meeting, call the AG and say, what do you do? And how can you help me do what I'm trying to do? That's very, very important. Come down to our offices and meet with us. If we don't have enough community meetings, ask us why we don't, and tell us you expect more. This kind of regular give and take is very, very important. And then understand that, yes, AGs are a critical player to stand for democracy, but they're not the main player, as I said. The grassroots leaders and the neighborhood leaders are the main players. They're the main leaders, and we actually work for you. And how can we work for you if you don't tell us what to do? We need you to be engaged with us that way. And then the other thing is that once we build that relationship and we have a fluid give and take back and forth, we'll be in a position to work on a whole set of other problems. Let's work on wage theft. Anybody game for that? Let's work to sue some of these bad polluters. Let's go after some of these folks who rip off and lie to consumers every day. How about these people who violate the Robocall Act? Anybody who loves robocalls? So I'm saying that the way that getting together around election protection is a way to build a whole other relationship. And I can tell you that one of the things that people ask me all the time is, what does the Attorney General's office do? And I love when they ask me that question, because then I get to tell them. And so by all means, whatever organizing you're doing, and everybody here is a leader and an organizer where they come from, make sure that the action that you're taking factors in the Attorney General's office. And some of you might come from places where you think the Attorney General's not really on your side, and some states you might just be right. But make sure that you are engaged with the Attorney General's office. Make sure you engage with our national group so that we can work together to defend and protect democracy and your prosperity. And what I tell people is that, look, we're the people's lawyer in your state. And in a way, a state attorney general, in some ways, is they're closer to you than the federal attorney general. And many of us are elected on our own rights, so we can't get fired by somebody above us who doesn't like what we're doing. And so they really are an important part of your team as you go out there and do your organizing. So that's it.
Thank you, A.G. Ellison. A.G. Henry, how can our audience, members of the public, organizers, interact in a practical way with your office?
Well, I don't know if I could say it any better than Keith said it, but I'll echo what he said. I really do think it's important, for us to be engaged with you. And so to the extent, I know next week I'm going to meet with all the mayors in Pennsylvania. They have an annual conference. And the topic that I'm talking about is something that Keith touched a little bit upon, which is artificial intelligence and deep fakes and things like that, and talk to them about how they can then take that information out into their communities. So that's just an example of how we can be engaged. And I agree, sometimes they don't understand exactly what the AG's office does, but we're happy. We have teams that go out and talk about the work we do, talk about how we can help, and we really are the people's attorney. So we're happy to be engaged. In addition to that, and specifically dealing with voters' issues, we have a hotline that you can call on our website that's set up so that if you see something in Pennsylvania, again, I think be vigilant, note what you see, and reach out to us. Reach out on that hotline. Go to our website. And we can, because we have a team standing by, we're prepared for this. So I think really just being the eyes and ears for our office, as well as keeping us engaged and reaching out to us, we're happy to come out. So really, those are the two key things I would suggest.
Thank you. And Sarah, you've been working with a number of AG offices across the country, looking at the programs they're putting in place, working with their election protection staff. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I don't think I can add much to what the attorneys general said, but I think it's just really important to recognize that these offices don't have eyes and ears everywhere, but you do. They're not going to know if there's a group that's going door to door intimidating voters and asking them if they're actually registered and they can vote, or if there's somebody standing outside a polling place saying, "Are you a citizen?" But they need to know that. And if you all are out there, or if you have your teams out there, then before you go out there, make sure you have that hotline number as part of the packet that you're sending your volunteers out with. Make sure that you have a website and reporting documents and every link that you need, and you figure out a way to document it in real time, because somebody might have to come back to that. Somebody might need to talk to you. Somebody might need to see a contemporaneous report for later litigation. So be prepared to help support these offices if they end up having to sue somebody, if they end up pursuing criminal charges, because you guys are the eyes and ears of our democracy.
That's right.
Let me ask this question of the panel, and I'll make this an open question, so whoever would like to jump in on it. If there's uncertainty following the results on Election Day in 2024, whether it's at the presidential level, maybe it's at a congressional level, maybe it's even a local race or a county race, what is it that you want people to keep in mind about the process and the Attorney General's role in that process?
Well, from the perspective of a state election board member, it takes time, right? It takes time to count every ballot, and when you've got a smaller race and really tight margins, you have to give the local election officials enough time to make sure that those ballots are counted. And the minute disinformation starts getting sown, then you've got chaos. And that's where attorneys general really are going to end up having to do the heavy lifting, because that disinformation so often leads to litigation and chaos. And these poor folks are already going to be overwhelmed. So as much as the best antidote to disinformation is to pre-bunk it, to anticipate what's going to be out there, get the right information out there. Second best is to debunk what they hear. But all of these processes take a lot more time than you think when the margins are close.
So I'm checking my Netroots app, and it tells me that this panel is supposed to go till 3:15. I have in my notes it's 3:30. So I think I need to wrap things up. So let me do that, and let me turn it over for maybe each of you to just have a 1 minute just concluding remarks. And if I can start with you, A.G. Henry.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I just want to echo what Sarah said. I think that's so important. If I could tell you the number of issues or complaints that we got in 2020, oh, this is happening and this is going on. And what turned out to be the reality is 99% of them were just that, misinformation. And so to the extent that you can be patient and that you can understand the process, and if you can debunk it, it's great, because that's what we ended up trying to do and let people know. But a lot of it just starts and then it catches fire, and it really is detrimental to everybody. So to the extent that we can do that. And I, again, will just really end with saying, thank you to everybody that's here and for your work that you do and for assisting in trying to make this process go as smoothly as possible. And know that we are fighting for all of you, and we're fighting for, fighting for democracy. So we're going to be ready for 2024, and we're happy that we have good partners. Thank you.
Sarah.
I'm just going to say that it has been an incredible privilege to be able to work with dozens of progressive attorney general offices and some of the finest professionals I have ever had the privilege to work with, their colleagues. And that is what gives me faith to keep going every day, to get up in the morning and go to work the next day, because they're ready. They're ready. They need you. We all need you, but let's go.
All right. And A.G. Ellison, bring us home.
So the legal stuff is very important, and we need your help on that. But the most important element is for us to engage our neighbors, knock on doors, call people, engage them, inviting them to democracy, increase participation, and then after we win these elections, then we insist that we co-govern with these people we have put in office, and that they're listening to us, working with us, giving us a reason to want to come back next time. And that is what we've got to do. I am imagining in this imperiled moment that we live in, and we do live in an imperiled moment, that we can have like a new birth of democracy in America. Because it's bringing us face to face with really what's at stake and how much some people want to take our rights away. And if you're pissed about it like I am, I'm saying, let's be pissed off together and defend our democracy, because that is absolutely what is on the line right now. And we're going to need everybody, and even more, way more than who's ever in this room. So let's go recruit and engage and work together, and I believe the future is extremely bright.